In defense of program hopping, I try to give you guys a perspective that other people aren't out there, sharing. Most people will tell you that program hopping is this terrible thing. Never ever program hop. And I agree that if you take it to an extreme and you're changing programs every week, then yes, this is very counterproductive to your long-term success. However, what I will point out is that there are many people out there who run various programs and change their program quite frequently, and they still make great progress. Well, but you see, it's more complicated than you think it is. There's almost like a right way and a wrong way to program hop if you think about it. So this is why I'm going to give you a defense of program hopping. So let's say that you're just doing strong lifts 5x5, or you're doing the NSUNS program or something like that, and you've been doing it for an entire year straight. There's this thing of diminishing returns, right? So at some point, you probably made most of your progress in the first 12 weeks of a program. And then after that, this progress slows down dramatically. So it's kind of like, we all know the thing about starting strength. When you first do starting strength, you put 5 pounds on the bar every week, and then eventually you can't put 5 pounds on the bar every week. You've now reached the intermediate level, right? But the same thing is true, even if we had a program that was much more complicated. If you had a program where, you're doing squats and you're doing deadlifts, you're doing presses, you're doing overhead presses, you're doing snatches, you're doing cleans, you're doing even some bodybuilding and accessory work. You've got tricep extensions in there and leg extensions and hamstring curls. And, you've got much more than just 3 big lifts. The thing is that if you keep doing those things, you're going to get less and less out of them. So this is kind of like the beauty of the conjugate system, which I'm not an advocate for following it as it is written, if that makes sense. So I do think that there's a lot of value in the conjugate system. However, a lot of people change their max effort every week, which probably works for very high-level lifters. But I think that the majority of us, myself included, are more like intermediates, in which case you may want to stick with the same max effort movement for like 4 weeks minimum to get the most out of it. If I back squat, and then next week I front squat, and then the week after I box squat, and then the week after I do, I don't know, some type of safety bar squat, and then, I keep changing it to some camber squat, and, I almost have to relearn the squat every week because it's such a different movement that it's very hard for me to say whether or not I'm making progress on this. But if I stuck with the back squat for 4 weeks, and then I switched to front squat for 4 weeks, and then I switched to box squat for 4 weeks, and then I switched to pin squat for 4 weeks, and then I switched to a safety bar squat for 4 weeks. Each of those 4-week blocks, I can see whether or not I'm getting stronger from one week to the next. And now when I come back to the back squat, I probably won't hit the same number I hit in the 4th week because of the fact that I have to basically relearn the movement in some ways. But now, by my 4th week of the second time through the back squat, which is like 5 months later, I probably hit a higher total lift at the end of that 4-week block again. Now, all that being said, so you've been doing strong lifts, or you've been doing NSUNS, or you've been doing, any good program. That's the important thing. Are you doing a good program? And I think that it's actually free. Elite FTS has these ebooks called like Programs at Work. And at some point, I know that there was some offer where, like, if you just entered in your email address, they sent it to you. I don't know how often those come up, but, I definitely got one of those books just by sending in my email address and subscribing to the newsletter. Anyways, the point being here, okay, if you're following the same program for an extended period of time, okay, what's going to happen at this point is, one, this is a big one, you're going to develop joint stress simply due to the fact that it's the same movement over and over and over and over again. I have explained this to people many times. If I front squat and front squat and front squat and front squat and front squat, eventually I start to get this pain in my patellar tendon. But if I just switch to back squat, suddenly I don't have any pain at all. It's just a minor change, right? I've just changed from a front squat to a back squat. But that slight change in angle puts a different pressure, tendon stress, if you will, on that patellar tendon, and suddenly I don't have knee pain. This is actually even more minor than you think it is if I just change shoes. So my favorite shoes are my Adastars. They're 2004 Adastars, and they have a very low heel. Well, if I start feeling any kind of tendon pain at all, I just put on my Antas for a couple days, and oh, I don't have any more pain. I can go right back to my Adastars. It's the same thing. I have my 080808 Romaleos. They're the Romaleo ones. If I throw those on for a few days, suddenly, my tendon pain disappears because that ever so slight difference. I mean, we're talking the difference of a 1/2 inch heel to a 3/4 inch heel. And that's all it takes. And suddenly it's a different angle for my knee, and I don't feel any more pain. If I'm doing behind the neck presses for weeks on end, and I start noticing, my one shoulder feels a little tight, I just switch to an overhead press, like from the front. I don't have any more pain in my shoulder. It goes away. So if you're doing the same movement over and over and over again, you will develop some joint stress just simply due to overuse. It's just the same movement over and over again. So when you change programs, if the program has slightly different movements, like you switch from a low bar back squat to a high bar back squat even, boom. For a lot of people, that's enough to relieve their hip or knee pain, okay? So, but the thing is that you need to actually follow the program for a period of time to get as much adaptation out of it as you can. So if you think about it, here's a stimulus, and we're going to get as much out of this stimulus as we can, and then whenever it doesn't really ever flatline. It can becomes like an asymptote, like you just keep approaching zero, but you don't actually ever hit zero. And so like we hit this point where it's like, well, I'm not making the progress that I was making. Now would be a good time for me to change the program. So like if you do something dumb, like I did Wendler for 1 week, and then I did Cube for 1 week, and then I did, I don't know, pick another program for 1 week and another week and another week, and every week you're doing a different program, that's too often, okay? But let's say you ran Wendler for like 4 or 5 months, and then you switch to Cube Method for 4 or 5 months, and then you switch to a conjugate style approach for 4 or 5 months. If you change programs, and I realize like it's still program hopping, right? Like you're changing programs. But if you got 12 weeks out of each program, even like let's say you just ran a program for 12 weeks and then you change programs, this is also going to alleviate a lot of the other issues that come up. So, a lot of times people think they have overtraining syndrome. You probably don't have overtraining syndrome. A lot of it is psychological. You're bored. It's not fun anymore. You get stale. And I've talked about this in the past. I did my video on why you should train incorrectly. You're better off following a suboptimal program that you're super enthusiastic about than you are to follow a program that is optimal, but you hate doing it. I made great progress whenever I did Dan John's Math Made Simple. Man, it's just a fantastic program. It can't be more simple than that. I mean, it really is as basic and simple as it can possibly be. But, the thing is that like once you get to doing, 225 for a set of 20, well, assuming that you started off with something lighter, it just kind of gets boring to keep doing sets of 20. So, now you're doing 225 for a set of 20. It's okay. And then the next week you're doing 230 for a set of 20. Yeah. 235 for a set of 20. Eventually I got up to 255 for a set of 20. And like, it's like those last few weeks, I guess it's really months actually, if you think about, how slow it progressed. It just wasn't exciting to come in and do sets of 20. Like when I first started the program, I was like amped up. I was like, this is gonna be great. And I was super and like just enthused and excited to go do sets of 20 because I hadn't been doing sets of 20. I'd been doing sets of like 3 to 5. And so doing sets of 20 was just something different. It was a novel stimulus. And so I was excited to go train. By the end of it, I wasn't excited to go train anymore. I was like, yeah, back squat, set of 20. Like, it just doesn't have the same appeal, you know? And I think the same thing even happens to people with doing 5 by 5. Like, yeah, I'm gonna come in and do 5 by 5. It's like you just don't have that enthusiasm. And that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about weightlifting. Weightlifting, I'm always excited to do cleans and snatches. Like, I love doing it, so it's just fun. And so like whenever I have been able to do those, like usually can't because I just don't have the equipment or the space or the ceiling height. Like, yep. But you know, like it's really fun for me to do power cleans even. So like even when I don't have the ceiling height to go overhead, I'll just do power cleans. I like doing them. They're just fun. So if you have a movement that you like and it's fun, you end up making progress at it because you're enthusiastic about it. So it gets rid of that staleness element, right? And so what I'm trying to express here is that you changing programs can very well actually help your long-term progress because when you get bored with something, you put less effort into it, whether or not you realize you're putting less effort into it. And the other thing is now you have a novel stimulus. And I already mentioned the part about the joints. So let's just say that you got one of these books, like you know, the Programs at Work or whatever it's called. If you ran the program through and then changed programs and ran that program through and then changed programs and ran that program through, you would probably make very good progress. But if you ran each program for 1 week and then switched to another program and then switched to another program and switched to another program every week, that's where the program hopping ends up biting you. Okay, so back to this whole concept, you know, if you look at like Bondarchuk, like that's a fantastic example of how changing the movement can further improve the athlete's performance. So it's basically like we're going to do power snatches. We're going to do power snatches until your progress plateaus, and then we're going to switch to power cleans. We're going to do front squats, and we're going to do front squats until your progress, you know, stagnates, and then we're going to switch to back squats. And so you only change whenever something finally hits a point where you're not making progress on it anymore. And this is kind of like one of those things where like you already know this intuitively because you've done some program where like you did sets of 8 until you couldn't add weight to the bar, and then you dropped to sets of 5. And you did sets of 5 until you couldn't add weight to the bar, and then you did sets of 3, you know, and then you went back up to 8s. That change in rep range, as far as your body knows, is a novel stimulus. We are stimulating new muscle fibers and, you know, sending a different signal than we were sending before. And it's no different than like if you were like, I tell you what, one of the craziest things that happened to me was I had an injury. My hip labrums are torn in both hips from playing hockey for so many years. And my one labrum really flared up. I guess I must have moved wrong and it tore, and I had all this pain. And I couldn't squat deep. Which, you know, if you guys know me, you know, you follow me on IG and stuff, you know, I squat till my butt hits my heels. Well, I could still squat, but I couldn't squat deep. So I just switched to box squats for a while. And it was amazing because I had never done box squats before. That's not something I ever used. And I switched to box squats because it was a way for me to continue training around my injury. So box squats were pain-free because they weren't deep. So I didn't have that impingement of my femur and the acetabulum. And I was doing heavy box squats, and I got to a point where I'm trying to remember what it was. I did something like 295 for a set of 20. And by that time, my hip had healed. And so I was able to go back to doing back squats and front squats. And when I went back to doing front squats, it was like, oh, 295 is easy. Well, 295 was not easy before that hip injury. And suddenly, having built that box squat, I was able to front squat 295 very easily. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll go for 305. I guess I'll go for 315. I guess I'll go for 325, 335. And that's what I ended up front squatting. Now, that blew my mind at the time because it was like, I've done nothing but box squats. And box squats put like 30 pounds on my front squat without doing front squats. Why? Because it was a completely new stimulus. It was something that I had never done before, and so obviously it made my legs bigger and stronger. This is a very long explanation trying to illustrate the point here, but what I'm trying to express to you is that program hopping is not the demon or the devil that we make it out to be sometimes. Sometimes, if you do it intelligently and you don't program hop from one week to the next, you're going to get better results by changing your program occasionally. So if you run something for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, you've milked that program and got a lot out of that new stimulus. When you change programs, you have a novel stimulus. That novel stimulus requires new adaptations. And so this is one of those things where, like, I point out to people all the time, like, if your accessory work isn't moving, like, let's say you do tricep extensions, and, your tricep extensions just aren't improving, switch to skull crushers, switch to tricep pushdowns, switch to, like, any other tricep movement, and suddenly you start getting stronger again. You've been doing dips for 9 months straight, and you just can't get past 45-pound dips for sets of 5. Okay, maybe switch to a JM press, maybe switch to a close grip bench press, something like that. And what's interesting is if you run that for a while and you commit to it, now you come back to dips, and you haven't done dips in a long time. So, when the first time you throw on the belt and add weight, you get, 5 reps at 30, and you're like, oh, I've gone backwards. Not really, though. What's happened is you just haven't done them in so long. And so, like, the very next week, you're like, oh, 30 is super easy. Let me put 40 on. Oh, 40 is easy. Let me put 50 on. And you end up passing your previous plateau because of the fact that you built other muscles, other supporting muscles, other muscle groups got engaged by doing the close grip bench press or whatever it was that you were doing. And so this is my defensive program hopping. My defensive program hopping is 1, it's novel stimulus. 2, it's relieving joint stress so you don't develop, tendinitis or tendinopathy or whatever you want to call it. Because tendinitis is apparently an incorrect term because there's no inflammation. So tendinopathy is apparently the correct term now. And then the other thing to it too, okay, is that it keeps you interested. It keeps you enthusiastic and you don't get bored and stale with it. And I think that that's a massive component to your long-term success. Because if you're not excited to go train, even if you force yourself to go train because you're so consistent, like whether or not you realize you're doing it, you just put less effort into it because you're not excited about it. It's like a new relationship. Have you ever noticed how, like, anytime you get into a new relationship, you start dating some new girl, it's really exciting? And then you've been dating her for 7, 8 years. It's less exciting than it was in the beginning, right? That doesn't mean you end the relationship. It may be a great relationship. It's just things are hot and heavy in the beginning, and then they kind of, they cool off a little. It's like that Bruce Lee thing. I think he said it was something like love is a friendship that catches fire. But then, like, whenever you've been in love with someone for a long time, it's like a hot coal. It doesn't look fiery, but, like, if you held it, it would burn you. And I think that's a great analogy, even for training. Like, when you do a new program, it's like fire. And then, that fire kind of goes out, but it's still hot. So you run it, and then eventually that coal kind of cools off because it can only hold heat for so long. So now you switch to a new program with the new flame. Yeah, there we go. See, I come up with this shit on the fly, man. I don't script any of this stuff, you can tell. So I literally just came up with a bizarre Bruce Lee love analogy, turning it into a training analogy. That's the point though, guys. So if you are noticing that things aren't moving and that you're, plateauing and you're getting stale, yes, that would be the time for you to program hop. So you should switch programs. And like I said, it's a thing where if you do it too often, you sabotage your progress. But if you time it right and you get as much out of a program as you can, that's a good time for you to change. I'll give you one last story. Wendler 531. I did Wendler 531, and I got all the way up to a 405-pound deadlift, which was fantastic as far as I was concerned, because I only weighed like 150 pounds at the time. The thing is, I couldn't get to 410. I just kept doing 405. I ran maybe 3 months in a row where my top single, was 405. Okay. Well, that was the point where I changed programs, because it was like 3 months in a row, I haven't broken my 405. That's probably too long. I probably should have changed sooner than that, right? I mean, that was 3 months where I just didn't make any progress. But at the same time, I can very confidently say I got as much out of that program as I possibly could. And that's something to think about. Did you get as much out of this as you could? If you did, it's time to change.